Hello and welcome, or should I say welcome back. In our defense is back after a break of a few weeks that we took over Diwali, and we are back in a very new avatar. If you had followed our last episode, you would know that Abhishek Balla, who was with me on this podcast for around 80 episodes, has left the podcast and he's moved on to some, like we discussed last time, greener pastures. Someone with the same level of experience in defense and same level of interest, I would say, in defense as Abhishek and I also. And that person is Shiv Aroor. Hello, Shiv.
Thanks,
Welcome to this
thanks, Dave.
podcast.
I'm the replacement for Balla, and I've been watching your podcast as
Okay.
well. So good to be here.
Thank you. So, welcome. Shiv has an experience of around 20 years, I think, covering defense.
Covering defense, yeah.
Covering defense. You started off in print, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah.
And then moved to television. At India Today Group, you've been here for how long?
Well, some would say too long, but about 16 and a half years now.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
quite a lot. That's quite a lot. So before we begin and before we discuss matters of defense, tell us a bit what made you cover defense, or was it just like, as it happened in the older days, the editor decided कि तुम ये cover करोगे, and that's just how it began, or was it your personal interest in this?
Yeah. So when I started covering defense, it was not because I wanted it. I was actually like most people who get into journalism, at least in that generation, I wanted to do politics because for new journalists in India, it's like, at that time at least, it was, if you're not covering politics, what are you covering, right? But as it happened, I was given a job with the Indian Express, the National Bureau, and I think I was the youngest person in the National Bureau. The
Right.
Indian Express is like an institution, right?
Of course.
And over there, I was 22 years old, and usually you spend a good 10, 12 years of your career doing other stuff before you get inducted into the
Yeah.
National Bureau. And here I was just like inducted into the National Bureau, and it was a really big deal. And Shekhar Gupta, who was my boss at that time, he said, "We don't have any vacancies in politics right now, so you cover defense," which was like the scariest day of my life because it's like I don't know anything about defense. I mean, I like aircraft and stuff, but I don't know anything about defense. But he said, "No, you got to do it." So that was my entry into defense, and like I said, that was 2004. So next year will be 20 years since I took that decision.
Wow, nice. And we hope to get whatever you learned over those 20 years onto this podcast, because the idea of this podcast is to, kind of break through the noise and bring you the nuances, because
Yeah.
matters of defense are not black and white. You have subtleties, you have nuances that need to be really explained, and that is what we aim to do. That is what we've been doing for the past 8 years. I hope so, actually. Our listeners.
No, I'm
and,
glad you said that
readers.
because there's very little about defense that's black and white.
Exactly.
Especially in the world we live in right now, where you've got three major conflicts
Yes.
in different parts of the world. So there's very little good and bad, black and white. Us versus them.
Yeah.
It's a very, very mixed bag. So I think it's a good thing that you're doing with this podcast to try and simplify things,
Yeah.
add perspective. So happy to add that.
Yeah, glad to have you. So let's start off. And since you mentioned conflicts going on in different parts of the world, I think this episode we'll just kind of get a brief overview of what's happening in the world of conflict, and let's jump in with the one that's raging right now. Israel-Hamas. We record this on, I think, 7th it is today. So it's nearly two months since Hamas launched a terrorist attack into Israel, and Israel has responded ferociously. There was a truce brokered, but that kind of fell through last Friday. And Israel has once again pushed into Gaza. You've been there,
Yeah.
which is one of the reasons I actually wanted to start this episode by talking about Israel-Hamas. You were there for, I think, a good week and a half or 2 weeks. I
Almost
think.
3 weeks, yeah.
Almost 3
Yeah.
weeks, all right. So you've been there. You've seen things that, we haven't seen. We've seen mostly stuff on social media, a lot of which is propaganda, a lot of which turned out to be later fake news. First, tell us what you think where the war is at right now, and we'll obviously get into the whole. See, wars and matters of defense can't really go hand in hand with morals, but we'll obviously get into that because the situation that's happening in Gaza right now really calls for that. But first, tell us what do you think is the situation right now?
So I spent between 2 and 3 weeks over there, and I got a chance to travel to all parts of Israel and spent a large part of my time on the Gaza border, with the forces, with the people. Unfortunately, couldn't get into Gaza for various reasons, but I was able to travel extensively in the West Bank, the Palestinian territories in the West Bank, and did a lot of stories from there. I think the thing that most people forget about the Israel-Palestine conflict, and I mean this relative to other conflicts, is this is a conflict that's been happening in cycles since World War II,
Yes.
right? It's not like Russia, Ukraine, where they're fighting now, or India and China who fought once in '62 and now they've got a confrontation. The Israel-Palestine conflict is a geographical, cultural, historical conflict that's been on since literally the creation of
Yes.
Israel, right? And it's gone in cycles. There's almost like a sort of proverb on the ground there that something has to happen every 7 or 8 years. And it usually has. The first Intifada, the second Intifada, the invasion of Gaza in 2009, 2014. Now you've almost got a semi-invasion of Gaza as well. So this is going to continue. The way things are at is this time, unlike every other time that violence has taken place between the two sides, is that Israel has never lost 1,400 people
Yes.
in one go before. Okay, you're right when you say, Dev, that this is a conflict that is drenched in propaganda. There is perhaps no better example of the use of psychological operations, false claims, fake allegations, exaggerated, death tolls like Israel-Palestine. You saw it in the opening days of the
Yes.
conflict, with that Al Arabiya hospital in Gaza and the beheaded
Beheaded
babies,
children,
etc. And I was there at those kibbutzes. And once you're there on the ground, these things start to make sense because emotions are so deep running when it comes to Israel and Palestine. In many ways, both sides have lost the capacity for a sober conversation.
Wow.
Very difficult for Israelis and Palestinians to have a sober conversation, and for an outsider like me to understand. And the thing is, for me, I had a bit of a vested interest in covering this because it was actually my subject matter in my thesis in my MA
Okay.
back in 2002, way long ago. And so in the course of my research, I'd met lots of Israelis and Palestinians, but to be there on the ground and to experience what almost a kind of survival nationalism feels like is difficult to understand because we live in a huge country, right? India is geographically vast. There's no real territorial
Yes.
threat to India. China might come in, Pakistan came to Kargil, but there's no danger of losing territory as such. When it comes to Palestinians and Israelis on both sides, if you look at it, they're like, if something big happens, our homeland is gone.
It's gone.
From Tel Aviv, I could drive to every part of Israel in 4 hours. The farthest tip from Tel Aviv is 6 hours. So it's a tiny little place. You can go anywhere in a day. It's a day trip, right? So over there, geographical survival is like a day trip. Okay, it's not a flight away.
Yeah.
And I think the optimist in me says that this is a war that will, sort of digest itself out. Certain objectives that Israel has listed out will need to be met. Most obviously the hostages. Thankfully, there's some movement on that front. But beyond that, I don't think it's going to be one of those conflicts that stretches for too long. Because Israel, for all its abilities, its strength, the aid it receives from abroad, is not a country that has the appetite for extended conflict. It has always preferred short, sharp, aggressive, punitive conflicts where it teaches the other side a lesson, creates a situation where those things may not happen again. But I think the gorilla in the room for Israel is not so much how do we end this war that has happened now, but how the hell did we get here? How the
Yes.
hell did October the 7th happen?
In the first place.
So it's a terrifying proposition for who's in power right now in Israel because they know once the fighting stops, an already angry public is going to want heads to roll.
Yes.
So that's where the real trick comes.
There already have been calls for Netanyahu to resign. I mean, not right now, obviously, because there is a war going on and the immediate focus area is kind of eliminating Hamas and just destroying all its abilities. But no, you made a very good point, and I really like that when you say it, when it comes to Israel and Hamas, there is no room for basically emotions or having logical talks, because that's also a sense I've been getting, and that's something that answers the question that, how can Israel be so brutal? Because unlike, let's say, an India-China, it is a land dispute at the end of the day. So you have that ability to come to the negotiating table, even if it goes nowhere, which it has been for the, and we'll come to that, for 20 core commander talks has been going nowhere. But even if it goes nowhere, at least you sit down and you say, "Acha, you go there, I go here, we'll do this." But there is no give and take when it comes to Israel-Hamas, because it's basically either you survive or I survive.
Correct.
But in what's been happening in the last few weeks, so in the last 2 days, for example, Israel has pushed south towards what is known as Khan Yunis, which is one of the other big cities of Gaza, south of the Gaza city. And Israel has been telling Gazans to move south. Egypt, which is the country
Southern
that
border,
shares the southern border, has refused to accept Gazan refugees, and Israel just keeps moving there down. It's like almost sandwiching them between the border and where the forces are. One, humanitarian crisis of a large level. Do you think, based on your interactions with the forces obviously will not care much about this, but based on your interactions with the Israeli public over there, is there any sense of what Israel is doing in Gaza? Because I'll give an example. One of our colleagues spoke to an Israeli woman whose brother is in the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces. And she gave this one quote, which I really like, that she said that there's a slight fear in some people that while fighting terrorists, Israel might end up looking like a terrorist. Did you get that sentiment over there at all?
It's a great question. Look, there are three answers to that question. For most part, Israel believes that its reputation, as far as Hamas is concerned, that ship has already sailed.
Okay.
The world already sees them as aggressors. Large parts of the global intelligentsia, the woke part of the world, as it were, already sees Israel as a terrorist state that's been killing babies and going after children and old people and stuff. So the narrative war is a separate and parallel war, and the one that it takes very seriously. Like, for instance, when I was in Israel, and I'll answer the second part of your question as well. When I was in Israel, they held screenings where they were showing body cam footage of what was captured from the Hamas terrorists, going completely against what Israel's principles usually are. They never usually show that kind of stuff because they take all that stuff into their security domain for analysis and stuff. They were showing this to journalists and diplomats and stuff. The reason for that is they believe they were losing the narrative war. Thought process in every IDF person's mind or military planner's mind was, what the hell? We lost 1,400 people in one single day to barbaric terrorists. Over 120 hostages, including babies, are sitting in Hamas captivity, and the world is telling us we are terrorists. Okay, that's the default Israeli emotion right now, or at least at that time. It's there even now. So they believe, boss, if we are good, we are terrorists. If we are bad, we are terrorists. If we are reacting to our babies killed, we are terrorists. If we try and hold back and not conduct an invasion, we are terrorists. So it's like for them, it's like
it's a battle lost. Let it be.
They believe there's no recovering that reputation. Also remember that, like I said, since this war has happened in cycles, war crimes, humanitarian torture, abuse, collateral damage, all this is already there on Israel's back. They can't wash it off. What is true and what is not true is a different matter altogether. And we'll get to the United Nations in a bit, because in no part of the world has the United Nations proven to be more useless, incompetent, wasteful, counterproductive than it is in Israel and Palestine. But that's a separate story. So fear about their reputation is definitely there. You can see it in many official actions taken by Israel, releasing audio tapes of terrorists while they were killing Jews in those kibbutzes, phoning their families and boasting about it. All these things never usually happen. But in this day and age of very quick social media, very quick being able to edit videos, put them out, Israel feels like they're almost on an even battlefield as far as Hamas is concerned. If you look at it like this, there's no comparison between Hamas and Israel when it comes to military capabilities, right? There's no comparison. Israel has tanks, aircraft, radars, etc. And yet they were hit in the manner they were on October the 7th. So Hamas perceptionally has equalized that capability gap between the two, saying that, look, here's a country that has occupied our territory. This is Hamas speaking, not me. Here's a country that occupies my land. Here's a country that has killed my family. Here's a country that has the best military equipment in the world. Here's a country that has the Mossad. Here's a country that's reputed globally for being hyper aware of everything that's happening around it. Here's a country that is, hyper alert and stays awake, does not sleep because it's guarding its borders 24 hours and nothing can move. Fauda and Yevo and all that stuff. That reputation of
Yes.
Israel is there. And yet, you saw what happened on October the 7th by a bunch of guys with Kalashnikovs and paragliders and bloody, Toyota trucks. Okay? Let's be very frank. They used off-the-shelf equipment, drones with grenades to do what they did. Okay? It was a terror attack, let's make no mistake. But what happened was a colossal, historically humiliating intelligence failure.
Yeah.
And in just those few hours, and this is something that a former IDF chief said to me, he said, Israel will have to spend the next 25 years recovering the pieces of its reputation.
Wow.
In many cases, they say that in many cases, Arab states or Israel's enemies would not attack Israel because its reputation was a deterrent. Nobody's going to mess with Israelis, man. Israelis are dangerous guys. Wherever you go in the world, Israeli special forces, nobody messes with them.
Mossad, for example.
So that reputation was a deterrent. Now, if you don't have that reputation, then everybody's going to mess with you, which is why you're seeing the Yemenis and the Syrians and the Jordanians and everyone sort of piling on to Israel at this point of time. So while Israel navigates what that sort of elusive end game is going to be in Gaza, they've been burnt twice. 2009, they invaded Gaza, didn't know what to do after they invaded it. 2014, they invaded Gaza. Ilaka is under us. Now what do we do? Now what? Okay, fine. We've brought our tanks in. We've invaded everything. We occupied the whole territory. Everything's under our control. Now what? So that now what is, they still haven't defined what that now what is. Is it about killing all of Hamas? Technically impossible because you've got a lot of Hamas leaders sitting abroad in Qatar and Turkey and what have you. Is it about not causing a humanitarian crisis? That's already happened. You've already got the world baying for your blood. So what is that end game? Where do they draw a line and say, okay, we've achieved what we wanted to do and now we're going to pull out and go back. Everyone goes back to work. We don't know what that is.
But you can't just pull out, by the way, just like that. Because after you've done what you've done, someone has to come in and, kind of do something.
Absolutely.
And there's also, by the way, a theory. I don't know if you believe in it, but there's a theory that Hamas was that plan, by the way. Post 2014, Hamas was kind of propped up by Israel through Qatar to keep the PA separate, Palestinian Authority separated, and just control Gaza. Tum, day to day sambhalo, and we'll just keep the border crossings with you. But they were not expecting Hamas to do what Hamas did.
So to answer that question, again, I'll quote what an IDF person told me. So first of all, I'm sure you've said this in your podcast before, but the Hamas is a political party. They like projecting themselves as this movement and revolutionaries, and you'll hear a lot of that stuff when you go down there. But Hamas is a political party. Like you have the Congress and the BJP, just taking examples. Congress and the BJP, you have the Fatah and you have the Hamas. These are two rival political parties under the Palestinian umbrella. The Fatah organization, which is the political party that was founded by Yasser Arafat, they control the West Bank, which is the areas around Jerusalem, which I travel to as well. Ramallah is the capital there. Gaza is completely different. It's controlled completely by Hamas. One of the reasons for what happened on October the 7th, according to senior intelligence officials and commanders I spoke to, was, look, Israel doesn't want the nuisance of having to govern Gaza.
Yes.
They don't want that. It's like, boss, we've got our stuff to do. We are happy. We're a happy, rich, progressive country with billions of dollars in aid flowing in. We don't want the nuisance of having to go and govern these rat holes. Okay, I'm using harsh language, but I'm just trying to reflect the sensibility there. Now, for two reasons, Israel was cool about what's happening in Gaza, even though they consider Hamas to be a terrorist organization. According to their intelligence, what was happening in Gaza was, now you're hearing a lot of propaganda, open-air prison, world's biggest open-air prison. If you actually look at images of Gaza, it looks like any other B-town. It's like a B-town. It's like an Indian B-town, little gullies, cheek by jowl slums. Crowded city places, beautiful, marina, the coastal areas where, of course, all the Hamas people live. Lovely, lovely marine drive and stuff. Some of the best beaches in the world apparently are in Gaza. So there was prosperity, there was internet, there were jobs. When I say prosperity, I obviously mean it relatively.
Yes,
speaking.
of course.
There were lots of schools. quite a lot of NGOs operating there, huge amounts of global aid pouring in. So there was no destitution and poverty in Gaza in that sense. So Israel was saying, so we've incentivized them. Peace is an incentive, profit is an incentive. There are businesses working in Gaza. So nothing brings peace like profit. So people are making money, restaurants are running, schools are running, there are cinemas, all that stuff. So there's a sort of equilibrium in Gaza, and therefore Hamas has no incentive to attack.
Right.
So you've got peace and prosperity and all that stuff happening in Gaza. Like you said, the border crossings are there, so aid and trade and all that stuff is going on. And secondly, you've got Israeli intelligence and Israel's border sensors and all that tracking it. So in case someone has the bad idea of trying to disturb this equilibrium, we'll catch them doing it. Both these things didn't happen. The Hamas guys were wargaming their entire attack right in front of Israeli cameras.
Yes.
But the Israelis were asleep because they thought, nahi, why would they do this? ये तो नहीं करेंगे, ये तो इतना अच्छा चल रहा है Gaza में, सब कुछ ठीक है, everyone is chill, everyone's on the beach, everyone's going for a swim, people from Gaza going abroad for holidays, fishing भी चल रहा है, ये वो, we've allowed so many lovely things in Gaza, why will they attack us? Completely, not figuring that this goes beyond Gaza. There's the Arab world. There's, there are other unsettled issues. The fact that the alleged occupation of this territory is an unresolved issue as far as Hamas is concerned. Why would they just be happy with Gaza and the West Bank? So those things are going to take for a very, very long time to come. The cynic in me believes, I don't think it's going to be resolved. It's going to be another cycle of violence.
Yeah. And even, I'll agree with you. I don't think it's going to be resolved in my lifetime.
Yeah.
But the current crisis, the end game, like Shiv said, not sure. And in this new version of In Our Defense, we'll keep tracking it because I think that's going to be one of the hot topics. Quickly moving a bit north of Israel to Russia-Ukraine. Most of our listeners and viewers will think, kyun? Kya farak padta hai? But the thing is, very weirdly, even though the most amount of conversation in India was about the Israel-Hamas war when it comes to conflicts, the one conflict where we actually have some stake as a country is Russia-Ukraine and not Israel-Hamas, which is also why the government of India has not really bothered much with statements. Boilerplate statements, we are sending aid, we are against terrorism, what happened to Israel was bad, but we're in favor of the two-state solution, etc. Right. Why Russia-Ukraine? Because as of my last research, I think around 60 to 70% of our defense imports are Russia-dependent. I don't know the current figure because there's a big push by the current government towards Make in India and also by the way, Israel a bit and America. But the worry that, we discussed this on the previous season as well with Abhishek. The big worry is that a lot of our current equipment, spare parts, depend on Russia. The MiGs, for example, some of our tanks, for example. We've just bought a battery of, I don't know, what's it called? The S-400, what's it called? The anti-air defense systems, from Russia, especially after the China standoff, which we'll come to in a bit. So two quick questions on this part. Your thoughts on, one, where is the Russia-Ukraine war going? If it's going anywhere, is it just going to be a slog match with them? Just like, Ukraine taking some territory here, Russia taking some over there, and then back and forth. And how big of a worry is it for the Indian establishment right now?
Well, the thing is, it's to answer your first question, it seems like a grind, right? The very aggressive, missiles flying at each other kind of phase of the war has ended now. Now you're seeing that happen periodically. It's still happening, but it's happening less frequently. There are still, like you said, territory being taken on both sides. Huge part of the eastern flank is completely occupied now by Russia, which claims the Donbas region as Russian territory anyway. Again, this is going to stretch out because this is and to remind everyone listening that this has not for a moment has this been a Russia-Ukraine war. This has been a Russia against NATO and the world.
Yes,
that's what this is. This is Russia plus China against literally the rest of the world. There are, of course, very important countries like India that have taken an independent view and vindicated for that view as far as Russia is concerned. But this is, in effect, a kind of a kind of cold world war, right? That's what this basically is. There are two countries doing the fighting, but everyone else
Involved
has
in
skin
some
in the
other way.
game,
Yeah.
is involved. Now, the reason why there might be some kind of a horizon line as far as Russia Ukraine is concerned is where's the money?
Yeah.
Okay, the US has an election coming up.
And they've just said that they are going to run out of money for Ukraine.
Biden is practically on his knees begging Congress, saying, "Please clear this money,
Yes.
otherwise this war is going to turn on its head, and we can't afford that. It's still going to happen on our watch." The United States has an electorate that is already pissed off with Biden for everything that he's done as far as Ukraine is concerned. You've got a Ukraine which is conducting special forces strikes, some missile strikes. But what Russia has proven, even though Russia's war didn't go at all the way it wanted to it to be like a lightning quick kind of pincer movement on Ukraine and completely suppress the country and do what it wanted. That didn't happen, obviously, because of NATO support. But now, with money intended for Ukraine being diverted towards Israel, the resources that Ukraine needs to extend this war. It's winter now. Okay, so in winter everything comes to a standstill because it's hell freezes over in Ukraine. It's so cold that you can't think, right? So the war sort of grinds to a halt, thankfully, in winter. But as soon as winter breaks, as spring arrives, the fighting will begin again. It'll be the third year of the fighting, right? And this time, it comes at a time when Russia will be aware of Ukraine's weaknesses. They will know that the world's attention is diverted towards Israel and Palestine. They know that NATO will be slightly less capable of providing readily the equipment, missiles, money, whatever it is to Ukraine because of what's happening in Israel. And therefore, they'll probably be even more aggressive. So I see a lot of blood next summer in between Ukraine and Russia. But I also on the silver lining to that blood is that I believe that with resources drained from this war, I think both sides will have to also sort of be forced into some kind of a resolution. You've seen Putin, very rare. He's gone out of Russia. Remember, he didn't even come to India for the G20. He didn't come for anything else. He doesn't travel out of Russia since this war began. He's currently sitting in UAE, traveling to Saudi Arabia. OPEC and all those things he's discussing, because he also realizes that, boss, I can't sit in Moscow and fight an endless war. I have to interact with the world. I have to be a world leader. Okay, so it's gone beyond Putin looking for some kind of a face-saving exit from this, because no matter which side you believe, Russia has achieved a great deal in this. They've occupied enormous square kilometer numbers of territory in the eastern flank of Ukraine. There's fighting still happening in the Crimea Peninsula between Ukraine and Russia as well. So as far as military objectives are concerned, Russia has demonstrated that it has a almost infinite appetite for loss, for damage, for human death toll, etc. It's a monster. Russia it's called a bear for a reason. You can fling like kilograms and kilograms of lead at it, and it'll just keep coming. It'll just keep coming at you because it's such an enormous country with enormous resources. One of the bloodiest histories from the Russian Revolution onwards. So, or whether it comes to the Battle of Stalingrad or the Soviet Germany operations, this is a country that is completely desensitized to human life loss. Okay, millions of people can die, and they're like, "Let's keep fighting." It's like that. So. And I'm simplifying it. I mean,
of course,
but I don't want to make it sound like Russians don't give a toss about human life. But I'm just saying that this is a country that has an appetite for destruction, and therefore, in many ways, I think I see blood next summer.
Yeah. The second part, how worried is the defense staff?
It's definitely a worry. And I think it's a good question, Dev, because like you said, a huge amount of our equipment is still dependent on Russia. There's been an ongoing effort for the last nearly 2 decades, as a matter of fact, to try and diversify. Even before Russia, Ukraine, India had already realized, we're not the, chota mota country we thought we were. We're actually a big, capable country with a massive coastline. And, everyone wants us to be this bulwark against China. So we are nobody's. We are not a satellite country to anyone. So we need to be able to make our defense needs autonomous. We can't be dependent, like you said, on spares and things like that. Now, Russia is our strategic partner. Okay, they've been a very reliable strategic partner. But people tend to, I think people tend to romanticize international relations a lot, saying, "Arey, ye to bahut reliable partner hai," and when we were in need, they came for us. Boss, when those needs were provided, we had to pay for those needs. Okay, none of this was free.
Free.
Okay, so if Israel gave you missiles for Kargil, or Russia gave you guidance kits during some other conflict or Balakot or whatever, we paid a lot of money for it. Okay, it was taxpayer money. Yours and my money was paying for it. There was no. It's not like, oh, what sweethearts, they gave us weapons when we needed it. Blood and sweat went for it. So let's put that out of the way for a moment. So anyone who thinks that yaar kitne pyare desh hain, such sweet friends, that's rubbish. Okay, everyone pays for what they get, and nobody does anything without a reason for it. Everyone sees benefit in India. Mera dost is a very big thing for countries. Let's make that very clear. Russia gains enormously from a country like India backing them in the Russia-Ukraine war and having an independent policy as far as that is concerned. But dependence on weapons is a serious issue. And the reason for that is going to be a part 3 of our discussion, Dave, which is that the world's biggest military confrontation right now involves India in Ladakh.
Yes.
So we are not a country which is at peace right now.
Exactly.
We are at a country where the war between the two world's largest armies is, I'm told, the closest is 16 meters away. The closest that Indian and Chinese soldiers stand right now in a place called Konkala is 16 meters away.
Wow.
Okay. So it's chill, it's peaceful.
Of course.
They're not going to fight. I don't think they're going to fight. We'll talk about that in greater detail. But we are a country at war.
Yes.
Okay. For all practical purposes, India is a country at war. So we don't have the elbow room to mess around with our supply chains. Tomorrow if our fleet goes down or our aircraft needs certain things, we can't have a dost ka guarantee ki aayega. Especially if it's a country like Russia that's bogged down in its own conflict. Ukraine, forget about it.
Of course.
We've got a lot of Ukrainian equipment in India. Whether it is our AN-32 aircraft, several different engines for our ships. The gas turbine engines that power our ships, I don't know if our listeners know, are made in Ukraine.
Oh.
So we are very dependent on Ukraine. Forget about Russia. So it's difficult. I was in Russia in 2019. Very interesting. Okay, this is before the war, right? But Russia and Ukraine were not talking. They don't like each other, right?
Yeah.
And I'm saying before the war. So we were buying these warships, frigates from this place called the Yantar shipyard, which is in a place called Kaliningrad in western Russia. And it's a Russian-built ship with a Ukrainian engine, right?
Okay.
So the engines can't be transported by Ukraine to Russia. So an Indian team goes, contracts the engine, takes delivery of the engine from there, and then personally takes it to Russia.
Wow.
Gives it to the Russians, and then they fit it, and then we bring the ship back.
Amazing.
So India has a lot of experience in dealing with these really, really troublesome parts of the world. Okay, and as a result of jugaad and stuff, we make use of it really well.
This was a perfect example of a jugaad.
This is crazy jugaad. But except the thing is, for a country like India, and I keep saying we shouldn't have to do jugaad.
Of course, yeah.
Jugaad to in a Soviet era, Cold War times, wo chalta tha. But now we shouldn't. There has to be absolute certainty, because war is not a joke. It's a serious business. If we need weapons and we need absolute assurance in terms of our military hardware supply chains, it can't be dependent on two countries that are at war. It can't. It simply cannot. Which is why, starting 20 years ago, this kind of diversification started. Let's get more French stuff. Let's get the Rafale. Forget about the more Su-30s. Let's get the Rafale because it's France.
Yes.
France will bleed you dry as far as money is concerned. They will bill you to death in terms of money, but they'll deliver the goods. And France is not at war, at least not at any great conflict right now. They've got internal stuff, but that's not a problem. America is another reliable partner. But there are complexities in terms of, can we use it for this? Can we use it for that? Who can we use it against? We'll do a separate episode on that. But the diversification of our hardware is absolutely necessary. the recent orders that the Indian Ministry of Defense has cleared for Tejas fighters, Prachand attack helicopters, this goes a very long way in pushing that Atmanirbhar Bharat. There's a huge criticism. I cover the Ministry of Defense, and I can tell you that in the armed forces, they're like, "Arey yaar, Atmanirbhar Bharat is just a slogan. ये बोलने के लिए अच्छा लगता है, लेकिन do you guys even do anything on the ground?" But now that's actually
happening. Yeah.
because this government, for all its faults as far as defense is concerned, there are many criticisms, has actually put its money where its mouth is as far as Make in India is concerned.
Yeah.
Because they believe that if you don't make hardware in India, you cannot control it.
Yeah.
I can buy Rafales or Su-30s or Mirages or whatever it is till kingdom come. But at the end of the day, if I want to change some code in it, I still have to go
back
abroad.
to France. Exactly.
If I do it here, if HAL builds my fighters, I can get an Infosys graduate to come and
do it,
jimmy my computer and get it working. So there's that. So there's a very concerted effort. So it's bad news. To answer your question after all this, it's bad news that we are still so dependent on Russia.
It's a good point. And, I like the point you made about how that we've always paid for the equipment that Russia has given us. It's not like they've given it to us for free, because that's a point I also made with Abhishek back in during season 1, that all this aid that Ukraine is getting, generations will pay for it when this war ends.
Oh, yeah. No one-way stuff.
Right. Let's come back home to the India-China conflict. Very interested to talk to you about it, but let's do that after a quick break.
So the good news in all of this is that we do have a vaccine that protects us against getting shingles in the later stage. Is it advisable to take it? Because I don't think it's, from what I heard from hospitals and doctors, it's not a huge demand for this vaccine.
Somehow in India or anywhere abroad also, we always relate vaccines to a childhood. That this thing needs to be done during the childhood because they have low immunity and all that. We did not realize that being old also, you need a vaccine. And shingle has to be given to everyone who is above 50, basically. Ideally, it should be given, whether he is at risk or no risk, because they have a fair amount of incidence of occurring shingles in above 50 years of age. And it is very, very important. And this fact, I think, sooner we are able to disseminate or educate the people at large, it will be easier for us to administer shingles vaccine. Because once they know that such a bad, what we call it, if the pain persists after beyond 90 days, we call it a post-herpetic neuralgia, which is akin to that, which really comes into your day-to-day life. Your quality of life has gone, basically. Each time we are suffering and all that, overtly, there is no skin rash, but the patient is writhing in pain always. He is not at peace. So once we realize that this can be preventable, I think everybody will be too willing to take one jab of shingles vaccine.
It's just one jab, or is it two?
No. Ideally, it should be two at a gap of 2 months to 6 months between the two shots. But it is one jab also gives fair amount of immunity. But ideally, it should be 2 injections, 2 months apart.
And it's safe. I mean, have there been any major side effects?
It's pretty safe, yeah. Pretty safe, except that like any other injection, it gives a local reaction, little pain in the arm and that, and little fever for a day or two, but nothing major in the system.
And it only protects you against herpes zoster, right? Not herpes simplex.
No.
Welcome back. This is the first episode of season 2 of In Our Defense with defense expert and journalist Shiv Aroor. Shiv and I have been, since this is the first episode of the new season, Shiv and I have been discussing the 3 major raging global conflicts in the world. And we are now going to move back home to the India-China, where I think our listeners and viewers might be surprised I'm referring to India-China as a raging conflict, because kuch khabar to aata nahi hai, sab thanda pada hai. But I'll tell you something, and for someone like me who follows a lot of defense journalists on social media and has had the privilege to talk to a few of them, like you included, because I'm also in journalism, there are things that cannot be printed or reported, because what's reported is always what is definitive, what is official, what comes from authoritative sources. But defense journalists, because they've been doing this for a while, Shiv, for example, 20 years, they do get a sense of what's going on. And what I've gotten from every defense journalist, regardless of their personal biases, every defense journalist, is that the India-China conflict is a massive one. India-China almost came to a war after the Galwan incident, in which 20 soldiers died, including a commanding officer on the Indian side. And I think a similar number on the Chinese side. China has never obviously come out and given the actual numbers. And it still remains a huge crisis that people are not talking about because sab thanda lag raha hai wahan pe. I think August or September, the 20th round of Corps Commander talks happened, which I honestly, as someone who follows it, pointless it feels like, because I don't even know what they do with it. I think they just come कि पिछली बार ये बात कर रहा था, अच्छा ओके ठीक है, उसको साइन ऑफ कर दिया, अब बात करा, no we don't agree, but okay we'll maintain peace, won't shoot bullets at each other, won't get into stones and sticks fight, which they have gotten. That's more or less it, because the sense that I'm getting is that this obviously requires a political solution, not a military solution. Because, and this is a joke that Abhishek I used to keep making on season 1, that this is an issue on which both sides can't even agree what the issue is, because you have a so-called LAC, but which is not defined. China says an LAC somewhere else, India sees it somewhere else. They can't even decide कि हमको झगड़ना किस बात के ऊपर है. So, to begin this new season with you and this topic, trust me, is going to keep coming up a lot more, because Pakistan is done with. Ceasefire is going on, holding solid. China is the new problem for India. The government, the military has obviously realized this for the longest time, because when I was a child, I remember these headlines of former retired Army, Navy, Air Force chiefs that, politicians need to stop talking about Pakistan, because this was a time when Pakistan bashing was all the game, and politicians start focusing on China. This is what the military veterans back then used to, and this is what I read about in newspapers. So obviously military knew this for a while. Now the government increasingly has also realized that this is a big, big issue. Your impression of where we are with China and how are we going to get out of this mess, if we are at all?
So since you started with the 20 rounds of talks that we've had, I'll just tell you a small little story. So whenever these talks happen, right, journalists will basically harangue the army spokesperson or the spokesperson sitting in Ladakh or the Northern Command and say, sir, takeaways kya the from this round of talks? And you usually get a, we discussed this and we exchanged notes and we've agreed to talk again in the future and blah, blah, blah. But in the, I think it was the 14th or the 15th round of talks where I think I got the best answer from, a brigadier who was an Indian brigadier who was part of the talks. So he said, yeah, you journalists keep asking what are the takeaways. He said the biggest takeaway is that we are talking. Right? Yeah. Okay. And I really thought about that for a bit. And then I traveled to Ladakh and I met him, and over a drink we were talking. And I said, sir, I've been thinking about what you said for a really long time, because Delhi में और भारत में the sense is कि अरे यार कितना बात करोगे, कुछ करते नहीं हो, you're not doing anything. So he said, exactly. Aren't you happy that nothing is happening? Aren't you happy that we are only talking? Yeah. Because it's so easy, and I think we live in a world where war is romanticized, and we live in a world where everyone wants like a definitive end to a situation, not knowing that war is for most part not only an extension of politics, but can also be interminable. We've seen conflicts going on for centuries in certain parts of the world. Not saying that that's going to be the case here, but first of all, India and China are two vastly different countries, but also very similar. Also very, very similar in some fundamental ways. They both share this part of the world. They both are enormously aspirational. They both have, global ambitions. There's let's not get into comparing the two countries. Let's zoom in now to what's happening on the ground. 16 meters is how far the nearest soldiers of India and China are currently. Like you said, after the Galwan War, the two sides came very close to actual conflict. It's something of a strategic miracle that the Galwan conflict didn't trigger a larger confrontation between the two sides, and that goes to not only people might emotionally say maturity. There was maturity on both sides and all that stuff. But it's also both sides knowing that a war between these two sides are going to be mutually destructive.
Yes.
Okay? Mutually, like, totally destructive. has anyone, people saying, sir, takeaways kya hai in talks se? Can they imagine what would be happening if India and China were not talking? Someone might argue back, Dev, and say that, I mean, yeah, you guys are talking, but the Chinese are kind of bogging you down into talks and busy building all that infrastructure over there. What you don't hear is, and this is not propaganda, these are facts. I've traveled there, I report on what's happening there. Who says India is not building infrastructure? Who says India is not building roads? Who says India is not building permanent structures? Like you said, ki both sides don't agree what the issue is, where the line is, where your LAC claim line is, our LAC claim line is, fine. Let's keep Bharat Mata ki Jai aside on this discussion and let's just talk about facts on the ground. We say our line is there, they say our line is here. Okay, they say their line is behind us, so we are on their territory, they are on our territory. It's a mess of lines. You remember during the Ladakh coverage,
Yes.
how many satellite maps have we seen? How many lines and graphics we've seen? It's become a mess in people's minds. Okay, so put all that aside. The fact is that China only speaks in one particular kind of voice. They only speak through muscular power, and they only respect muscular power. For the first time, and I'm not saying this because I'm Indian, I'm saying this as a student of military history, I can say this is the first time that China has kind of run into a wall. Okay, and I'm not saying this in a sentimental way. I'm not saying that, man, India is awesome, look, they've hit a wall. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying, think about it. Why would China deploy in such huge numbers, a couple of divisions strong at last checked, in an area where they don't want to achieve anything else? What more territorial ambitions could they possibly have? Which they do. They do have it. But India is not just any other country, right? India is a country with India is a nuclear country like China. India has a highly professional land force like China, much more experienced in high altitude warfare.
Yes.
You will hear, since In Our Defense is a podcast where we would like to talk about things that are not maybe spoken about elsewhere, is you will constantly hear about, why did India let go of the Kailash range? Why did India get down from Blacktop and Helmet Top near the Spangor Gap, south of the Pangong Lake, to go into specifics? How do people know that we've vacated all those heights? But China is operating and it has occupied certain advantageous positions north of the Pangong Lake. How do you know India doesn't have similar positions? Maybe India is a kind of country that doesn't talk about them because they want deniability. If you want to prove it, you have to go there and see. And if you go there and see, by then the situation is already bahut dur chala gaya hai. So there are those who feel that India is playing this from a position of weakness, is not flexing its muscle because it doesn't really have anything to show China in this case. And that's BS. Nothing could be further from the truth. India is in as many positions of advantage with China as China is with India. I'm not saying that China doesn't occupy certain places which are of an advantage, which gives them direct strike range for Indian strategic assets. But we've got the same. We've got the same as them. And that's actually what's keeping the peace. The fact that they are locked in a kind of cold embrace in Ladakh right now, where, nobody has, neither side has the flexibility to move.
Because if I move, then he'll also move.
Yeah, so it's like that, which brings it back to the original point that you made, which is that both militaries are chilling out over there, and I mean this respectfully. They're not chilling out, of course. They're on duty, but they're chilling out in the confidence that nothing can escalate here on unless something drastic happens. Because now the military's work is over.
Yes,
the military's work is over. Jo hona tha, military ne kar diya. The military is there in huge numbers on both sides, within visible distance of each other. Soldiers can see each other. By now, they must be friends also. Always happens, believe me. Another thing that people don't know, on borders, LOC, LAC, when soldiers are deployed for a long time, they become friends.
Which is why China changed the unit that was at Galwan.
Correct. So they
fight
removed
happened
that
between
unit and then they got those
fresh
other
unit.
guys in. Correct. So I'm just saying that now there is a belief on the ground that, look, we've held territory, we've held them off. They're also saying the same thing on their side. Their guys are dying in large numbers because of high altitude sickness. Chinese soldiers are not used to high altitude operations. So even 3 years into this conflict, they've not been able to acclimatize properly, which is why, and the thing is, when I speak to Indian Army forces on the ground, I sense a changed tone also. There's that bit of anger and aggression that was there in the first 2 years, that has kind of evaporated because now nothing has happened. Now it's like, bichare, they're dying so much in such large numbers because of high altitude sickness. This thing should end soon, so people can go back. Those who talk to each other like, yeah, I'm the only son of my parents, and I've been brought here. I've been here for 8 months. I want to go back also. Many of them are, because of the single kid policy in China, because of the population thing. Many of those in Chinese soldiers there are the only children of their families. So there are all these beautiful, sad, tragic human threads in this story. So war is not just about tanks rolling and fire and death and destruction. It's also about people just yearning to get the hell out of there. Just to close that point, the thing is, India is in a far better position because it has had years and years of experience in Siachen and Ladakh and stuff. So they know what high altitude operations are. But the ideal situation is not for India to have a militarized Ladakh at all. The reality might be different. It does not suit anyone's purpose to have 100,000 troops in just eastern Ladakh. Nobody wants that. It's expensive. It's unideal because it takes a toll on your soldiers' health. But India has demonstrated that 3 years into this conflict, it will do what it needs to do.
Yeah,
that's it.
Right. To close this topic, because so what you said is completely bang on. I mean, military has done its work. The only thing left for them to do is actually fight a war. So, and if it comes to that, they'll do that. Obviously, that's their job at the end of the day. So the only people who can resolve this are the politicians in Delhi and Beijing and the diplomats in the respective embassies, wherever. And knowing how diplomacy works, I'm pretty sure there is something going on that we are not aware of, that we'll sometime, whenever it succeeds, if it does, will be made aware of. But I want to ask you, because I've been asking this question to every person I meet when it comes to defense or strategic affairs. And I'm pretty sure Anna, our producer, who also hosts her own podcast, Geeta's World, with one of our colleagues, Geeta Mohan, on strategic affairs, has been asking the same question, and I have not got an answer. Why did China do this in the first place? Because you have to remember that Galwan Valley was not the trigger of the current conflict. The conflict began a few months before that, because the first Corps commander level meeting had happened much before the Galwan Valley clash. It began because China started building up troops along its border, along the LAC. India saw that, responded with equal number of troops, and that's how the standoff began. We've had also a fight in Ladakh a couple of years ago, the viral video of stone pelting that was happening, and then you obviously had Galwan. But why? This is a question that I've just, because pehle tha ki Xi Jinping is facing some internal problems, so just like a kind of shore up domestic support, he's done this. Because, and this is something I've said this on the show previously, if you look at China's map, almost 90% of the population is in the eastern coast. There's a huge sort of wasteland in between, and then you have the India border. So for China, this border should not really matter much. But even then, they thought to go ahead and do this build-up.
See, okay, so I'll answer that question in two ways. To give you a very straight answer right off the bat and not dance around it, is that most people are still answering that question, including military planners. Okay. Yes. My answer to that question would be that there is a certain element of all of the things you've just mentioned. Internal politics as far as Xi Jinping is concerned, his own need to flex muscle within the Communist Party. But I think, and this is my reading of the situation, which is that two things. A, China is a country that is opportunistic. It's the world's greatest opportunist. Okay, whether it is in terms of manufacturing, how it grabbed the manufacturing opportunity in the 60s and 70s and made itself a great economic superpower, or whether it is its territorial ambitions. Now, territory in India's northern areas has always been an issue as far as China is concerned. Now, China had deployed a large contingent of forces on the Tibetan plateau, Tibetan region, as part of a large training exercise. This was happening in late 2019, pre-COVID. The Galwan clash happened in June 2020, a few months into the COVID outbreak and a global lockdown. It happened amidst a lockdown, if you remember. Now, my understanding is China believes that the kind of global diversion provided by the COVID pandemic, which of course was their baby, coupled with China's own strategic reading that this is the time when the world's attention, India's attention, this is only one layer of what I'm trying to explain, is diverted towards this enormous global crisis that's looming. And remember, at that time, people didn't even know how big COVID was going to get,
Yes.
right? But maybe China knew about it.
Of course.
Okay? Let's try and do some of the things we can't otherwise do.
Interesting.
Okay? Let's move in and create some facts on the ground. And if there's one thing that China knows how to do well, it is to move really fast in large numbers. It's like a Lord of the Rings kind of country. It's like spectacle. Just we've got all these people on training right now in southern Tibet and Xinjiang and wherever. Let's just push them closer to the LAC now. Okay? Let's just push them closer and see how far they can go. We'll just keep saying training. See how far it can go until we are stopped. And then uske baad dekha jayega ki kya hota hai. Now, the numbers that they had pushed were so large that India was like, hello, what's going on, man? Okay, because India had also thought that, we've got an equilibrium. We're both nuclear countries. We're both strong. We've got enough forces to fight each other to death. So why will you do such a thing? But this was, in my reading, triggered by internal political compulsions for Xi Jinping, but also a strategic vision saying that, okay, diversion. This is what we've always wanted. Aksai Chin is ours. Northern Ladakh, Karakoram, all these places are ours. Now is the time to do it. Now is the time to do it. Because right now, India's resources, attention, strategic mindset, everything will be split. How do you save 1.2 billion people from getting COVID or saving a few square kilometers of territory in the northern hellscape of Ladakh? That was a miscalculation,
of course,
by them. That was a major miscalculation because India is not Mongolia or whatever else, right? It's a country that has a huge armed force. It's nuclear armed. And that's where things are at. So I think it stemmed from internal compulsions, but also opportunism. It's like, let's move in there. Uske baad we'll talk. Na? And that they've achieved. See, China may have hit a wall, but they've achieved that objective, which is not that they're there. They've built all those helipads and airports in those areas, Hotan and all those places. Because now they've created those facts on the ground. They're like, we're here now. Now we're not going to move. Which is why you're seeing permanent accommodations for soldiers coming up near Pangong and stuff. So now they're like, okay, we're here, and as it's like a tenant. Like, we're here now. We're not going to move out of this place, boss. Hum to yahan, you go to court if you want to, but we're not moving out. It's like that. So now, once you're here, it's like occupation is 9/10 of the law. Now we're here. Getting us out is going to be difficult.
Of course, deal with us now. Baat kar lo humse.
That's it. This is the new reality. Get used to it. That's what it is. Which is why, like you said, and I completely agree with you that on both sides the military's work is done. There's nothing more to do. Patrolling chal raha hai. They bump into each other here and there. All that is happening. And one thing I would tell our listeners is take most reports with a pinch of salt as far as, they've achieved this. They're denying our patrolling this. You'll always hear this one thing about how in the plains in the north, the large plains in the north, Daulat Beg Oldi and that particular area, India is completely denied territory there and we can't do our patrolling there. Literally 4 kilometers south of there, there's an Indian unit sitting on their side, denying them the same kind of patrolling. That will never be reported. Okay, so it's this is going to be a continuing thing until there is a political solution to it. Now, what is going to be the trigger for that political solution? I don't know because this is China. I mean, let's make no mistake. This is a inscrutable country. Ruthless in many ways, only understands strength, is a bully. All these things are true as far as China is concerned. China is not saddled by the baggage that India has. Democracy hai, parliament hai, we have to convince our people before we try and achieve something. They don't have that baggage. It's one guy calling the shots over there.
Yeah.
So it's not an even war. But even with those discrepancies, India has taught China a very bitter lesson as far as, look, you can come till here. Now let the politicians talk, but we can hurt you.
Yeah.
That's what it is.
Yeah, I think that's a good point to end this episode. And I have a feeling that China will come up a lot more on this season. And, interesting information for you. In season 1, this is something Abhishek and I used to always joke about. Pakistan rarely came up. And that just tells you how things have changed as far as India's national defense is concerned and its priorities are concerned. They've managed to have this reiteration of the ceasefire agreement. And since then, the LOC, the line of control along with Pakistan, has more or less been thanda. Nothing much is happening apart from like one-off incidents here and there. Focus of the establishment, whether it's the military or the political arm, is China, and I'm pretty sure it'll come up even more in our discussions as we begin the season 2. Thanks, Shiv. I hope you had a good first episode. You enjoyed it. I'm not sure. This is the first time you're doing a podcast, right?
Definitely the first time, yeah. And it's much more fun than I thought. I thought I was going to run out of things to say, but...
Oh, no. Trust me, this is... podcast can just sometimes stretch on and on and you won't even realize. Like after we end this episode, this episode and you ask the producer how long it was, you'll be a bit surprised to know how long it was.
Nice. Okay, good.
So hope our listeners and viewers had fun. As always, you can leave us your comments in the YouTube comment section below, or if you want to drop a message, you can WhatsApp us at 8588 That's it for this week's Defense Dose. For more, tune in next week. Till then, stay safe and do not cross any boundaries without a passport. Bye-bye.